Can only one prize unleash an internal war in Ferrari? How serious was the technical failure that almost takes Hamilton from the track? And what did Leclerc explode on the radio, breaking with years of diplomacy? Prepare, because the disaster in Marina Bay could mark the beginning of the end of this dream alignment. Ferrari arrived at the 2025 Singapore Grand Prix with an atmosphere full of expectations, contained pressures and an urgent need for claim. After a series of races in which the Scuderia remained competitive without really threatening McLaren or Red Bull consistently, Marina Bay represented more than an urban circuit. It was a golden opportunity to change the narrative of the season. Singapore has historically been a favorable layout for Ferrari due to its technical nature, slow curves and emphasis on traction, where pure power differences are usually mitigated. This was, in theory, the perfect scenario for the SF25 to claim. Upon arriving in Singapore, Ferrari knew that another strategic or technical error could not afford. The technical direction of the team, led by Frédéric Vasseur, had worked intensely in the recalibration of the SF25 aerodynamic package to adapt to urban circuits like this. Internal level, there was even talk of a mini-revolution in the motor mapping and in the energy management of the hybrid system to maximize low-speed traction performance. The simulation data were promising, and during the previous week, engineers claimed to have a clear strategy to combat thermal peaks that usually affect the car in high humidity conditions such as Singapore. However, these optimistic forecasts soon crossed out. From the first free training session, the alerts began to light. The pilots reported chronic braking instability, the front axle showed an erratic response, and brake wear was more severe than expected. Telemetry analysis revealed abnormal overheating in the hydraulic system, which caused inconsistencies in the delivery of torque and curve outputs. The car behaved unpredictably even in short batches, and that forced the team to apply improvised solutions that were not in the original plan. The problem, as usually happens in these cases, was not only technical, it was structural. Communication between the pilots and the box's wall began to deteriorate quickly. Charles Leclerc showed his discomfort from the previous briefings, while Lewis Hamilton, which is still in his process of adaptation to the internal technical language of the team, began to perceive a worrying disconnection between what he requested from the track and the answers he received from the pit wall. The high-pressure environment and the lack of a clear technical hierarchy in crisis situations created a perfect storm. Ferrari, who had planned this career as a possible turning point, found himself improvising on the march. They adjusted cooling levels, redesigned load flows in the brakes, and even considered a complete change of compound strategy, but none of that solved the fundamental problems. Each solution brought new commitments. By the time the classification arrived, the team was already on the defensive, praying for minimizing damage instead of attacking. What should be a weekend to redeem himself ended up becoming a tactical and emotional ambush that would test the relationship between his two main assets, Leclerc and Hamilton. Charles Leclerc is one of the most talented and respected drivers on the grid. His clean driving style, his ability to extract the most from the car in qualifying, and his ability to remain diplomatic even under pressure had made him Ferrari's natural leader in recent years. But all that came crashing down in Singapore. What happened that night in Marina Bay was more than a strategic failure or a technical problem. It was an emotional fracture that exposed what was already unsustainable. From the first stint, Leclerc knew that something was not working. The team ordered him to perform lift and coast, an energy and thermal management technique that consists of releasing the accelerator before the braking point to reduce stress on the brakes and save fuel, but what is normally applied at specific moments, in this case became mandatory from lap 8. Almost the entire race. The car had to be managed as if it were constantly on the verge of breaking down, and that on a circuit like Singapore, where violent braking and direction changes are constant, was a recipe for disaster. Leclerc couldn't take it anymore. In a radio message that would later be leaked, he exploded, "Don't even complain. For God's sake. We're doing 200 meters of LECO all the time." It wasn't just a cry of frustration, it was the venting of a pilot who had reached his limit. And this detail is important. Leclerc does not usually raise his voice. For him to break down like this, things have to have reached an intolerable level. The comment was not only against a bad specific strategy, but against a team philosophy that, in the eyes of the driver, was not working. The underlying problem is that Leclerc felt that he was being left alone. Since joining Ferrari in 2019, he has been patient. He has endured poor decisions, inferior cars, and failed strategies. But this time it was different. This time there was a new teammate, a world champion, and the car kept failing the same. There was no redemption on the horizon. The SF25's lack of competitiveness forced it to drive in survival mode. And the moment that broke any illusion of progress was when Kimi Antonelli, the young Mercedes debutante, passed him cleanly at turn 16. It wasn't just that the car couldn't do more, it was that Ferrari was being humiliated by teams that were not favorites on that circuit. It was at that moment when Leclerc spoke on the radio again. This time, the anger was directed directly at the wall. He questioned the strategy, criticized the lack of rhythm, and hinted that he no longer trusted his own engineers' decisions. Post-race statements were even more alarming. In an unfiltered interview, Leclerc made it clear that he had lost faith in the project. He said, without hesitation, "I wish I could say that I am positive for the rest of the season, but I don't think there is anything in the car that shows me that we are going to take a step forward." That phrase, full of pessimism, was not just a technical criticism. It was a statement of emotional break with the team. The perception in the paddock was immediate. Some journalists began to speculate about a definitive rift between Leclerc and Ferrari. And what was experienced in Singapore was not simply a bad weekend. It was the collapse of a relationship based on unfulfilled promises. Ferrari had promised that 2025 would be the year of rebirth, the year of consolidation, the year in which Charles's talent would finally be rewarded with a car to match. But the SF25 not only failed to deliver that, it exposed the same old weaknesses and did so at the worst possible time. What Lewis Hamilton experienced at the Singapore Grand Prix was not simply a bad result. It was an extreme situation. An experience that tested not only his ability as a driver, but also his trust in a team that promised redemption and ended up delivering a vehicle on the verge of structural collapse. From the beginning of the weekend, Hamilton noticed worrying signs in the SF25 response. Although in qualifying he managed to place the car in a relatively competitive position, from the race simulations his engineer Riccardo Adami had identified abnormal patterns in the front brake temperature sensors, especially on the left axle. The information was discussed in the previous technical meetings, but it was decided not to modify the cooling ducts or significantly alter the setup, partly due to the risk of compromising the balance of the car on such a demanding track. It was a mistake. Over the course of the race, thermal degradation of the braking system accelerated exponentially. At a circuit like Marina Bay, where the frequency and severity of braking is extreme, this meant Hamilton had to constantly adjust his driving style to compensate. The result was defensive driving, plagued by micro-corrections and time losses that took him lap after lap away from the possibility of fighting for real positions. Still, the worst was yet to come. In the final laps, the brake system partially failed. From the onboard, it was evident. The SF25 lost efficiency on the left front axle, generating a brutal imbalance in braking. At one point, sparks began to fly from the car, a terrifying visual spectacle that confirmed what the telemetry already knew: the system had crashed. The left disc operated above 1,200 degrees, a lethal temperature for carbon fiber. And while the sensors went off, Hamilton continued on the track, trying to keep the car under control, trusting only his instincts. The radio conversation between Hamilton and Adami was tense, almost silent at times. There were no screams, just urgency. On one of the final laps, Hamilton asked if he should retire. The answer was negative. The team believed he could still complete the stint. But that decision was as risky as it was incomprehensible. With the car unbalanced, without stability in the front axle, and with visibility reduced by the smoke that was beginning to filter into the cockpit, Hamilton was forced to continue. And he did it. But at what price? Every curve became a battle. Every braking an act of faith. The surgical precision that defines his style was replaced by defensive driving, in survival mode. The audience watched without understanding why Ferrari kept it on the track in those conditions. It was no longer a question of strategy, it was a question of security. When he finally crossed the finish line, Hamilton didn't even celebrate. His silence said it all. He got out of the car without looking at anyone. There were no explosive statements, but the gestures were more eloquent than any words. The disappointment was total, but so was the worry. Because for a driver like him, who had entrusted his last stage in F1 to a new project, these types of errors are not tolerable. Not because of what they mean in points, but because of what they reveal about the technical preparation and reliability of the team. The 2025 Singapore Grand Prix was not just another failed race in Ferrari's recent history. It was the mirror in which all its internal fractures were reflected, all its technical deficiencies, and above all, the emotional wear and tear of its two main figures, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton. The first, with his emotional outburst on the radio and his devastating statements. The second, exposed to an extreme situation that bordered on irresponsible. Together, they starred in one of the most tense and revealing episodes of this season. But the most disturbing thing is not what has already happened, but what is coming. What decisions will Ferrari make to try to put out this fire? Will there be changes to the wall? Will we see a technical reconfiguration mid-season? Or will this be the start of a slow deterioration that drags the team out of title contention once again? And this is where your opinion matters more than ever. Do you think Ferrari still has time to save its project? Or does this disaster mark the beginning of a definitive rift between the team and its star drivers? Is Leclerc the next to seek new horizons? Can Hamilton rely on such an unstable environment to build his ultimate legacy? Leave it all in the comments.